Hello everyone. Once again, I'm Renata Robinson. I'm the Senior Director of Research and Strategy at Georgia Alliance for Progress. And I have the honor of leading a committed in-house research team, our research manager, Alexander Lloyd, and our research associates, Brandon Mitchell and Nia Moman. Together, we design and execute research that helps Georgia's progressive ecosystem understand not just what is happening, but why it's happening. And so we study how Georgians are thinking, feeling, and behaving in ways that shape our civic life, and we translate that insight into actionable strategies. Our approach is both rigorous but also human centered. We listen deeply, we analyze carefully, and we bring those insights back to the groups on the ground who are actually building power in Georgia. And so, this project that we're presenting to you today, we've named Beyond the Ballot. And it's really about turning people's real experiences into intelligence that our ecosystem can actually act on. And so with this, we really designed this project to understand three things. I know there are five things, but I'm gonna put them in three big buckets for you. Number one, why people made the choices that they made in the November 2024 election, whether that meant voting or opting out, how they're feeling now, almost a year later, in this very interesting political climate. And then finally, what they're thinking about in terms of 2026, what will motivate them to engage or re-engage, and what still makes them hesitant. And so together, these questions help us to really see the continuum between behavior, emotion, and motivation. And again, this is the human side of civic participation. Next slide, please. So here's what we did. My team facilitated 10 focus groups between September 22nd and 2020, 20, the 22nd and the 25th in this year, 2025. We brought together a cross-section of Georgia voters of color, Black men and women, Latino voters, rural residents, young voters, faith-oriented voters, working class families, and a special group of people who traditionally participate but sat out in 2024. And we really wanted to hear from all these folks. Each discussion was 90 minutes. We took a mixed methods approach, and we included short in-session polls that helped us to identify patterns across each of these groups. Um, and just one note before we get into this is that these findings are directional and insightful, but they are not statistically representative. We'll talk about it later about how we want to do that, but what we're sharing today is a snapshot of sentiment and lived experience. Is not a substitute for statewide measurement, but these conversations do reveal the feelings and beliefs that often sit under the data that we rely on. And so with that foundation, I'll turn it over to Alexander and then Brandon to walk you through what we heard, and then I'll return to discuss strategic implications and where we go from here. Take it away, Alexander.
All right, thank you so much. So first, we're going to look at reflections on the 2024 election. The number one thing that everyone said across the board was that the 2024 election was tumultuous. They cited the swap at the top of the ticket, replacing Joe Biden with Harris for the Democratic presidential nomination had a rippling effect that caused feelings of unease. Secondly, they talked about divisive campaign content. They pointed to various issues and moments that divided people, such as the Palestinian genocide, third-party voters, and specifically Trump's "they're eating the cats and dogs" line. Across the groups, multiple participants brought up unceasing political texts and ads, which turned them away from engaging with these campaigns. The third thing was the distrust, and this is general distrust in internet and social media. Political content online was difficult to verify during the election, according to the participants who said they were unable to distinguish between true information and false information. They pointed specifically to deepfakes and AI as sources of distrust. And this distrust was specifically heard from Gen Z participants. They offered some of the most robust criticisms and distrust in the internet. They highlighted that the internet is good at reaching people, but it costs the establishment of trust. So these are just some quotes. One Black Gen Z man said, "The internet as a whole is just awful. I mean, you can't trust anything." Black Gen Z woman said, "Social media is a tool that people use to make you feel a certain way. So you can't always go with the first thing that you see all the time." And another one said, "You could do the social media stuff." She's talking about like campaigns. "Can do that. At least I would know your name, but it's not going to sway me so much." Turning to issues and concerns, we see that cost of living continues to be the number one issue. Participants highlighted that costs are increasing without wages increasing. And it's important to note the cost of living is inclusive of other costs such as like healthcare, housing, and groceries. So it's kind of at the nexus of a lot of different issues. And nearly two-thirds of participants rated this issue either first or second when asked to pick their top issue. That's 65%. And a quote here, "A lot of people are giving up because it's just too expensive to do anything. You got to make a decision if you're going to eat or have an apartment." So, who do they blame for the current cost of living crisis? Nearly half blame billionaires and corporations hoarding wealth for the current state of the economy. And when we talk about economy, we're talking about affordability. We're not talking about like Wall Street, Dow Jones, and all of that. People see economy, they think their cost of living. So we have the 47%, nearly half, that blame billionaires and ultra wealthy and corporations who hoard profits. A white Gen Z man said the billionaires and the corporations lobby the federal people, and they're able to get what they want because these politicians are acting in their own self-interest and taking all this money. But in the same breath, participants see Trump and the Republicans as an extension of billionaires and the ultra wealthy. This is an additional 29% that blame Trump and the Republicans. As one Black woman who is in her 30s and in the faith-based group said, it's all about the stocks and corporations and what he's doing to manipulate the market and the kickbacks. It's definitely the corporations, Trump helping them, and the billionaires together right now. So they're able to connect the dots between who the villains are and how it's impacting their everyday life when it comes to the cost of living. Racism and discrimination and crime and safety tied for second in this issue list. Several participants felt discrimination played a major role in the 2024 election, namely racism and sexism. A Black male voter from rural Georgia expressed that the 2024 election was a backlash to the Obama era. He said this country was not prepared for a Black person as a president, and they damn sure weren't prepared for a Black woman to be president. They're going to do whatever they had to do to make sure that didn't happen. Looking at crime and safety, many individuals gave contrasting opinions about the causes and parties responsible for addressing public safety. Specifically, many in the group that voted for Trump praised the use of federal forces to address perceived rising crime rates, despite many mentioning that cities have record low crime rates currently. Other groups expressed mixed feelings about an increased law enforcement and military presence, saying that it might lead to more discrimination. So it's kind of like a lot of different perspectives here. One Black man in his 50s who's a Trump voter said, "You got to get the cost of living and that inflation down. That brings a lot of crime, that brings a lot of anxiety, a lot of confusion and chaos." He then went to say, "I'm willing to go rob that gas station because my needs are not being met." So here we're seeing a situation where they are tying cost of living into crime and safety and what's like the root cause of crime and safety. They understand it. Across all groups, participants want these issues addressed, but they do not believe state governments or the federal government are capable of doing so. However, local governments are perceived as more effective than state governments or the federal governments. Over half, around 62% of participants said that their local elected officials address the issues that matter to them well on some level. Comparatively, only 13% of participants said national elected officials are addressing the issues that matter to them somewhat well. The reason for this, for the belief in local elected officials, is really accessibility and nearness. They're close to them. For example, one said, "My local officials live up the street from me." They deal with the same issues, so they're going to have more of an investment to try to make things better. Another one said, I saw one of my city council people recently. I'm breaking bread with him at the store. They're accessible. So it's the fact that these people are in front of them, they're experiencing the same issues, they're in the community that make people trust them more. Um, Fortunately, no participant said national elected officials are doing very well at addressing the issues they care about. And they offered a couple reasons to explain the ineffectiveness. They said these officials are just working to be reelected, not to make a difference. They said that in the government, things move too slowly, so it's impossible to get anything done. They said federal elected officials are paid by lobbyists to prevent progress, and that government structures prevent federal elected officials from being effective. So here we're able to see that they're looking at multiple different reasons why both they may be for to blame and that they may be facing obstruction. As one Black woman between the ages of 18 and 29 said, they're making laws for the whole nation, basically. So something that the federal government implements for the nation may not benefit Georgia as equally as it does California. So moving on, we're going to do a little pulse check and looking at current issues. Um, so we introduced a couple different current events, and most participants were aware of the events introduced through social media. The events included the Hyundai ICE raids in Georgia, the occupation of major urban cities by protest groups or police military, Epstein investigations, what's happening with vaccines, and then Georgians being fired for quoting Charlie Kirk after his demise. Social media was often the initial source of news and current events for the participants, but they expressed mixed feelings about the influence of social media on their opinions. One Black man who voted for Trump said, I think seeing something on social media, it at least sparks my interest, or at least lets me know. Okay, there's something going on, but I usually don't take that at face value. If I want to know more about it, then I'll go and do some more research about it just to figure out what's going on. Looking at specifically the Hyundai ICE raid in Georgia, the topic was contentious in many groups. Participants argued that the government needs to take the criminals out of the country while also conceding that ICE is targeting Latino people in general, begging the question of where the boundary is between enforcing law and protecting the innocent. Nearly all of them said they are aware of the Hyundai ICE raid and they expressed disappointment regarding the event, but also specifically because of the effect it will have on foreign investment. One Black woman who did not vote in 2024 said, I think it highlights the contradiction of wanting to have foreign investment in this country and have jobs. And have jobs in this country. It is showing that it's not a stable place to invest in if they can have issues like that. Looking at another issue, the occupation of major urban cities by protest groups or police military. The administration's military occupation of some cities caught the attention of participants. The most robust conversation around the occupations occurred in the group of Black participants who voted for Trump in 2024. A Black man in the group said that his family lives in DC and is able to go out and enjoy Washington without the fear of muggings and things of that nature. That's a quote from him. When speaking on the possibility of the occupation occurring in Atlanta, one woman who voted for Trump in 2024 said, I hope they don't bring them here, but if they do, I have to understand that, due to her belief that crime has progressively gotten worse since the COVID restrictions were removed. And with that, I'm passing it over to Brandon.
Hello, everybody. So I'm going to be talking first about the post-2024 perceptions. Go to the next slide. So close to 78% of participants said that they feel more discouraged about politics in the country. And there seems to be a deepening sense of cynicism in the direction of the country and its leaders. One of the quotes that we heard was, I feel like there's no accountability, and day by day it's less and less because so much has happened. People are getting used to it. So just like no matter what crazy thing is said or done, it's just like, okay, we just accept it and there's no consequences. That was a Black woman at the age of 40, and she was in the faith-oriented group. We also see that people are really souring on both major parties, both federally and statewide. a Black woman who was a non-voter in 2024. She said both sides here in Georgia just want to be right and they want to be in power, and we're losing focus on the actual issues. I feel like politics is more becoming a mudslinging contest versus what it's supposed to be, which is a public service. You can go to the next slide. All right, so this slide is about vote power perception. So just a quick overview on what that is. So vote power perception means how powerful somebody feels like their vote has in changing the things that matter to them. So our past research found that there was a correlation between high vote power and high voter turnout. So since I think 2020 or 2021, we've been tracking this perception every year. And what we found this year or during this focus group is that the rural voters feel the most powerful, and Black women, who are historically one of the most reliable voting blocs, feel the least powerful, even though they still say they're very likely to vote. But this does suggest that a lot of TLC needs to be given to both of these groups to ensure that they feel valued in the political process. We go to the next slide. All right, so let's talk about reflections on everybody's November 2024 choices. So this chart shows that a majority of the participants they're not feeling regret for whatever decision they made, whether it was to vote or not vote, and who they voted for. Not a lot of them are feeling a lot of regret. 55% of them feel satisfied, and only 27% feel dissatisfied with their choices. And just to read some of the quotes. And again, this was not just about if they felt satisfied in who they voted for, but if they voted at all. And we had a non-voter group. So some of the people in the group said, I was satisfied with the vote choice because I feel like I did the right thing in not voting. I don't feel like either party represented my values. I am someone that really values voting, so I hated to not have to vote, but I feel confident that I made the right decision to not vote for either one because I didn't agree with either one. I was a Black woman, 41. And then there was a Black woman who's 26 who said there were numerous polls that showed that the majority of Democrats disagreed with the policies concerning Palestine, and they just adamantly said that they would not change their policy to reflect the will of their constituents. You can go to the next slide. So again, we had a specific group that focused on Black people who voted for Trump in 2024. So most people who did vote for Harris, they did show a level of satisfaction in their decision. But when we got to this specific group, it was kind of mixed in how people felt. What some people were satisfied with was often what others were dissatisfied with, specifically on this administration's handling of immigration and crime. One of the quotes here, or the quote here from a Black man who's 50 said, there's certain things that he implemented in terms of Doge or whatever. I know there's a lot of wasteful stuff, but it's just in the way he approached it that they didn't like. And we can go to the next slide. All right, so now let's talk about reflections on candidate traits. Participants, they care a lot about a candidate's value and their authenticity. Party labels actually are pretty toxic to people. They really don't like them. It's a turnoff. And they were not really interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of policy, but what they do want is to feel like the candidate is a real person and genuinely is fighting for them. The quote here is from a Black woman who was in the faith-based group said, you can have maybe the same religion as someone, but what you value is different. So what they show, even though they say we care about kids or we don't abort the babies, but you don't care about them once they get born. So that was like a reflection on, well, do you actually care about the policies that you say you stand for? Next slide. And just a couple more quotes that talk about how people care about honesty and integrity. A Latino man that was 52 said, there's a difference between voting for a politician and voting for a statesman. Anybody can be a politician, make promises, whereas a statesman is someone who has a point of view, has issues that they want to bring up. They are that are very dear and can speak frankly about them. A Black woman who was 26 who did not vote last year said, what is helpful is the ability for the candidate to have an opinion independent of their party affiliation, and they're being able to have criticisms of their party affiliation. So, speaking of realness, participants are craving real life community, and they want politicians to reflect that. They want more ways to engage in in-person settings, including the young people who grew up with the internet, because they were the ones who really disliked the internet. They also want candidates to focus on hyper-local issues. So if a local or a state or a federal candidate can speak to, for example, the pothole on 8th Street and explain how their work will repair that pothole or whatever hyper local issue is happening in that community, that makes people pay attention more. And they want candidates that show that they care about the community that they represent. And this is very important. They want to see the candidate show that care before it's time to campaign and without the cameras capturing the moments for social media. But that point is a slippery slope that we'll get into a little bit later. But yes, they really want to feel like you really mean what you say and really care about them. What they did not like was being pandered to. But when we pressed them on what that means, they had a hard time explaining the difference between pandering and prioritizing them. The example that was the most clear to us, that explained how they felt, was them talking about how they didn't like celebrity endorsements, at least for the presidential campaigns. So here's a quote from a Black woman in the low income group. She said, we don't need them to do that. That's not their job. Why are Megan Thee Stallion and Beyonce here? That's not their job. Next slide. So participants, like I said, do not like parties. But if they had to choose, they'd probably say that they like the Democrats and the progressives more than the Republicans and the conservatives. But even still, that's only 20% for that viewed Democrats and progressives positively. However, these groups did not get a high negative rating, but the Republicans and the conservatives got a very high negative rating, with Republicans having 60% have a negative feeling and 44% have a negative feeling towards them. All right, so this chart is showing which civic activities participants feel make a difference, and that's on the left. And on the right is which activities participants have done themselves. So as you can see, there is some difference in what people do, what people believe is useful and what people actually do. And the one that was the most stark in contrast was attending a city council or school board meeting. 46% of them said that that is a thing that can actually make a difference in the communities, but only 13% actually did that. We can go to the next slide. And looking forward to 2026, this is the final section for me. So the participants were rather motivated to vote next year, but there's always room to grow with that. 29% said that nothing would stop them from voting. A Latino woman said, if you don't vote, it's like I told people that I know in my life during this administration, well, I don't want to hear you complain because you just, I guess, could care less. You can go to the next slide. And when asked what motivates them to vote, a plurality of them said it's to make a difference on specific issues that affect them, followed behind a candidate that will fight for them and a candidate they can trust. Next slide. Just read this quote. It's a Black man, 45, who did not vote last year. He said, you can't show up to a gunfight with a knife, so to say, and you have to kind of match on a certain level the same type of energy. That's a candidate who will fight for me. And another Black man who did not vote said, I just feel like you can't trust anybody. Everybody is just, in it for themselves. They like to promote a lot. I just feel like every candidate or anyone really in that position is more about just trying to get votes. So here we are between the pandering and prioritizing dichotomy. Now, the what we as I said earlier, Black women had the lowest vote power perception, but they still are the ones who indicated that they are the most likely to turn out next year. So that's good news that they still feel like they're going to vote next year, but that's something that should not be taken for granted because they currently feel like they're being taken for granted. Next slide. And the people who didn't vote in 2024 are not really showing a desire to vote next year. But they did indicate that there are some things that might motivate them. And some of those things include a candidate who stays true to themselves, a candidate that fights for working people, and a younger candidate. A Black woman who didn't vote last year, 57, she said, we're the one putting you in office, giving you our vote. So we expect for you to be there for us and work with us. And the final slide for me is one that I would have never guessed. We did not ask about Ossoff or Warnock. The Black voters who voted for Trump brought them up, and they like them. They particularly like Ossoff. Um, and this is where the slippery slope happened. So Ossoff, one Black woman said that Ossoff be out here fighting for people, you know what I'm saying? Suing and all that kind of stuff. Warnock don't do nothing. This is the slippery slope here because she knew that Ossoff was doing things because she saw videos of him doing it. But also, we said earlier that sometimes rope to walk with that. But somebody who talked about Warnock said Warnock does do a lot in the community that he's not gonna get praised for, and he is going after legislation. Uh-oh, can I still be heard? Okay, cool. Sorry, I said my internet was going out, but I'll restart that quote. Warnock does do a lot in the community that he's not going to get praised for, and he is going after legislation for Black votes and poor people. So, I mean, he's not always, he's one not to always want to toot his horn. That's a Black man, 54. And to retort this, that same Black woman said, if you're not saying nothing, I feel like you ain't doing nothing. So again, there's a tight rope to walk between highlighting what you're doing and being genuine when you do it. But I would have never guessed, I doubt most of us would have ever guessed that this specific group would have such high praise for these two senators. And that is it for me, so I'll pass it back to Renata.
Thank you both and good job. So when you take all of these perspectives together, there are a few themes, clear themes that emerge about what it means to build power in Georgia right now. And let me just say, because I didn't catch it, these are implications, not recommendations. So this is the step before the actual strategy. But here are some things that we should be thinking about as we create strategies for 2026. First, it's clear that people are surviving. They're out here trying to survive before they participate. So everything from politics to voting to community life is filtered through the question of, can I make ends meet? And so if engagement does not connect to people's everyday struggles, it will just not land. It's just not going to land. And it connects us to the second item here. People are simply tired. There's a layer of exhaustion that sits underneath everything we heard. It's not apathy. People still care. They can clearly talk about all the things that they care about, but they're worn down by the constant crisis, the constant messaging, and very little visible change. And so our work has to name that and meet it with honesty instead of pretending that their fatigue isn't there. The third thing is that trust looks different than it used to. People are not putting their trust in institutions or parties, they're putting it in people that they actually know. the pastor, their neighbor, a local leader who's showing up consistently. So our credibility is moving through relationships now and not headlines. And then also, power is real, but it's fragile. So we heard multiple times during our focus groups about how people know that their votes matter. They talked about how Georgia made a difference in 2020, but they're not convinced that it adds up to real change that they will see in their lives. And that's the tension that we have to bridge for them. We have to help communities feel that what they give is actually leading to something tangible. Next slide, please. Representation, it matters. It matters, but it is not enough. So yes, seeing someone who looks like you in an elected position is meaningful, but it does not replace accountability and it does not replace results. People want more than symbols, they want follow through. The other consistent thread that we heard throughout our focus groups is that party labels just don't hold the same weight anymore. People are moved by authenticity. They are moved by effort. And so we really have to make sure that we are prioritizing truth telling and consistency more than any partisan frame. And then the fear factor. We really heard a lot about fear of violence, fear of being silenced, fear of speaking up and it not mattering. And so that has to be a part of how we're planning for safety and care in our work. It's not just something that we know in passing. We have to build it into our strategies. And then finally, we say this all the time to donors, members, anybody who will listen. We have to have year-round presence because credibility lives in consistency. And we hear people say it over and over, year after year, that people disappear after elections. And they're not just talking about the elected politicians, they're also talking about us. They don't want us to just come to their door when we're asking them to do something. They want us to be around, helping out, giving them information between elections. And our ecosystem simply can't afford for people to view us as transactional. We have to show up even when there isn't an election on the line. Next slide. And so this project and all our other projects are never meant to end at the end of that particular project. This is just the beginning of more learning that we want to do to keep pace with Georgians' attitudes and how they're evolving. Next slide. So our next phase, hopefully, is to field a statewide survey so that we can understand how widespread these perspectives are, so that we can add that quantitative, statistically significant lens to it. But we really want to see where these patterns hold true across the state and to pull on threads that we heard in the focus group so that we can really determine where our efforts can make the most difference. And so just quickly to talk about these three core themes that I'm interested in. Power, trust, and agency, really measuring how perceptions of power and accountability can influence civic behavior. Next slide. Representation, authenticity, and party identity, testing how voters define credibility and who they trust to translate politics into real life. And then finally, the next slide. Sustained engagement in civic infrastructure and really identifying which small, consistent actions best help people feel connected between elections because we know that that's what increases our chances of them continuing to participate in the electoral process. And so together, these studies will help us transform the qualitative insight that you just heard to quantitative understanding that we can really use to move our strategies forward. But at its core, Beyond the Ballot was about listening deeply enough to turn stories into strategy. And that's what my team is committed to doing. We ground this ecosystem in research because it's insightful, useful, and real. And so with that, we'll take questions and then we'll pass it back to Kevin.
Thanks, Renata. Will there be a report with
Yes, we are
the
working on a report now. We actually wanted to get it out, or have it ready for today. But right now it looks like an academic paper, so we want to make it a little more pleasant to read for y'all. But it'll be out very soon, within the next couple weeks.